I need to build an outdoor table, and it's a fairly simple design, so I decided to challenge myself to see if I can build this table in one day. I have a list here of 22 steps that I need to complete in order to get this done, so let's get started. I'll attempt to build this in one day, and I'll also build it using materials that were free. I have a friend who's a contractor, and he had all this leftover sapele for an outdoor pergola project that he didn't know what to do with. But I knew it would make a perfect outdoor dining table, and it's been sitting in my garage for a couple of years waiting to be transformed. Some of the boards were in better condition than others, so I picked out the best ones and broke down these huge boards into usable chunks that were easier to manage. When I say huge, I mean huge. The longest ones were 14 feet long, and they were all 11.5 wide by 1.75 inches thick. These were meant to be the rafters of a pergola, and if you're not aware, sapele is a great choice for outdoor projects due to its durability and rot resistance. Basically, you get almost the same look and performance as mahogany or teak, but it's way less expensive. Because I was attempting this one-day build, I had to be as organized as possible, so in my planning stage, I measured the boards I had and drew them into SketchUp, where I could lay out the cuts I would need to make, which made this process very quick. The only struggle was the heavy lifting. First 2 steps are done, 20 more to go. To work as efficiently as possible, I would group similar tasks together instead of focusing on each part one at a time. So now I'm ripping at the table saw. First, I rip the boards that will be the stretchers. Then I rip the 2 chunks that will become the 4 legs in half and make sure to label those so I don't confuse them with the top slats that I'll rip in half next. These top slats will go across the width of the table like this, and I'll need 15 of them to make a 7-ish foot long table. I chose not to leave these boards super wide because wider boards are more likely to cup, especially outdoors laying flat as a tabletop. Sapele is a pretty stable wood, definitely more so than something like cedar, but still, keeping these boards narrower just made more sense for a tabletop that's going to live outside. Up to this point, I was just making rough cuts to break the big boards down into manageable pieces. Now it's time for milling, where I bring everything to its final dimensions. I start at the jointer, where I flatten one face of each board, then using that flat face as a reference, I square up one edge. It takes me about 15 minutes to go through all of these pieces. Then I send them through the planer to make them all the same thickness. I wasn't aiming for any specific thickness, I just kept passing them through until all the rough milling marks were removed from all the pieces. These boards were considered S4S. They weren't rough, but there were still a few bandsaw marks on them that needed to be cleaned up, which I did in about 3 passes that took around 5 minutes each. These ended up being 1.5 inches thick. Now I bring the boards to their final width of 5.5 inches at the table saw using the jointed edge against the fence to make the board square. The legs need to be the same width as all the slats for the look I'm going for, so I cut those along with the top slats, and while I was still at the table saw, I ripped the stretchers to their final height as well. The last step in the milling process is to cut everything to final length, and I did this using a stop block at the miter saw. You can see that I'm using a 3D printed flip stop that I designed here, and a lot of you have been asking me for this file, but I wasn't completely happy with the setup, so I designed something completely new and different that I hope I can share with you guys soon. I think you're gonna like it. If anyone's curious, I'm cutting these slats to 40 inches long, so the table is going to be 40 inches wide. Aside from the fun challenge of seeing if I could actually build a table in one day, there was a practical reason behind it too. I had one rare day with 0 distractions. No kids around, no housework that couldn't wait, no dinner to cook, no basketball carpools, no homework help, none of the usual stuff that pulls me away during the school year. Just one full day to focus on a single thing. So I figured I'd make the most of it. I know we're only about 3 to 4 minutes into this video, and I only crossed off 8 steps for my list, but everything you just saw up until now was about 4.5 hours of work. It's about 1:30, so time to break for lunch. I'm a little bit behind schedule. I thought I would have lunch at around like 12:30 and 1, but I think I'm still good. I got all this, just takes a lot of time to get all these cut to size. And now I have to use some thinking and brain power to do the joinery and all that kind of fun stuff. So gonna fuel up and get back at it. Since I was just milling these parts to clean them up, the final dimensions of each board didn't end up matching exactly what I had in my SketchUp drawing. But I needed to know the actual final length of the table to cut the long aprons to size. I expected this might happen, so I had a step on my list to make some 1/4-inch spacers to lay everything out to get the real world table length, and it ended up being just a 1/4 inch shy from my drawing. I didn't really talk too much about the design of this table yet. I knew it couldn't be too elaborate because I only had one day to build it, but I still wanted some cool design features. So I scoured the internet for inspiration and narrowed it down to a handful of tables you see here. You guys want to see something cool? With one click, all my tabs collapse and expand with tab islands. I have one for coffee table ideas, one for draw pulls, and another for things I want to 3D print. That's over 25 tabs in one clean window, all thanks to this browser, Opera, and I'm obsessed with how it's helping me stay organized. It's also perfect for multitasking while I'm in research mode. With Opera, I can pop out YouTube videos and move them anywhere on my screen without opening up a new window or adding any extra apps. Opera also has a built-in AI tool called Aria that appears with a quick shortcut. I hit Command/ or Control/ and ask it anything, like, how can I build an outdoor dining table in one day? Pretty generic answer, so I give Aria some more prompts, like, can you give me a cut list for a 7-foot long table? And thanks to the help of Aria's multimodal answers, I'm pretty amazed that it lists what I need to buy from the big box store to make a table. I even have suggested links to kick off my shopping. You can also use Aria to generate images, which is super creative. But back to the design of this table, there are two designs I like the best. Instead of flipping between tabs, Opera has a split screen mode that's enabled just by dragging a tab down. Now I can easily view both tables while designing mine in SketchUp. I didn't even get into all the amazing features of this browser, so if you want to try Opera for yourself, it's free. All you have to do is click the link in the description below. Okay. Now that the long aprons are cut based on the actual table length, I can start working on the joinery. These aprons will connect using half laps. According to my design, the legs and short aprons are positioned next to the second slat in from each end. So I marked a center line on that second slat, then lined up the long apron so it's evenly spaced across the slats, and then transferred that center line onto the apron. Next, I marked a center line on the end grain of the short apron, lined that up with the mark on the long apron, made sure everything was square, and then marked the edges of the short apron to get the width of the half lap. The easiest way for me to clear out the bulk of the waste is at the miter saw with a depth stop. This is really quick to do, and it's super satisfying to break away those little bits. I was concerned about getting this cut to be perfect on the miter saw for each cut though, so I only went close to my outer pencil marks. I thought it would be quicker for me to not have to focus on getting it perfect at the miter saw and just make a template where the dimensions are exactly what I needed. The opening was the same thickness as the material, and I added a stop on the end so it would be placed in the same position on every piece. It took me about a half hour to dial in this jig to make it perfect, and it ended up being a huge waste of time. It caused nothing but problems. On the first use, it caused some really bad tear out on the end, which was fixable with CA glue and green tape, but it cost me some time. Another problem was that I needed to lower the bit to cut the rest of the joint clean, and I didn't realize that the collet was protruding slightly, and it marred up my joint pretty bad. I had to just resort to cleaning it up with the miter saw in the end anyway, and there were a bunch of other problems I had that I didn't film because I was getting frustrated, but in the end, I got a perfect fit.
The router was a bad idea.
It took me about an hour and 45 minutes to cut the 4 half laps on the long aprons. It should not have taken that long. Moving on to the mating parts, I gave up on the router template idea and just used the miter saw instead. With the stop block set up, I made 4 identical cuts across all the pieces to define one end of the joint. Then I grabbed the offcut from the old router template, since I knew it was the exact width of the joint, and used that to set my stop block for the other end. Made that cut 3 more times, then just cleared out the waste in the middle, and cleaning up the bottoms of the cuts is super satisfying to do. I repeated the same process for the rest of the joints and made sure they were the right size before doing the test fit. Making these cuts exclusively on the miter saw only took about 20 minutes. That's how long it should have taken the first time around. When you're looking at a list, things seem so simple. It says all I have to do is cut domino mortises, but sometimes figuring out the layout with dominoes is tricky. I marked out where they need to go using one of the top slats underneath the aprons as a guide, which was simple enough, The tricky part was how to get the domino to cut perfectly centered on those leg pieces. After a bit of testing and trying things that didn't work, I realized when you cut using the bottom plate as a reference, the center of the mortise will always be 10 millimeters from the plate. So all I had to do is use that as a guide to make a template to ensure the mortises are cut perfectly in the center of the boards. Figuring all that out and making the perfect size template took me about an hour, but actually making the cuts took 8 minutes. To make the matching mortises centered on the aprons, I had to do some figuring out too. A little shim was necessary to lift the fence up a bit because of my actual stock thickness. That took me about 15 minutes to dial in though, and only 2 minutes to actually cut all the parts. Time for the test fit. The dominoed leg assemblies come together really nicely, and the long aprons slip right into place on the half laps as well. Awesome. At this point of my list, it said to determine if I need extra cross braces for more support. So I did a few test swings. So I thought maybe I would need some center supports, like more supports in here, but I really don't think that's necessary. I think this is super solid. There's no glue in there, and I could do that all day. What time is it? Ooh, it's 7:30. Okay, I can still make it. I can still make it. I can still do it. I think I can still do it. Okay, all the hard brain power stuff was sorted out. The rest of the list was just the fine details. Again, I grouped each task on my list so all the curves are cut in now. The bottom of the aprons will get a large curve cut on the end, and you won't really see this part in the actual table, but it reduces the chance of someone hurting themselves as they cross their legs if they're sitting at the end. Actually, before moving on, I need to fix something. On one of the legs, I didn't realize the domino was cutting on the looser setting, and I didn't like the play in there, so I cut some dominoes in half at the bandsaw and glued them into the sides to fill in the space. Then I cut them flush, cleaned it up a bit, and recut the mortises using the same template as before. This took no time at all, and it made me so much happier that they were the right size. Now I can cut in the curves on the ends of the aprons. I rough cut them at the bandsaw, and then using a 3D printed radius template, I made the curve perfect by lowering the bit with each pass, and then swapped out to my longest flush trim bit on the last pass. Now the slats on the ends get a curve on them using the same method. Only this time I chose to bring the workpiece to the tool instead of the tool to the workpiece. I make these decisions based on which is easier to hold. These slats are easy to hold at the router table, and the aprons felt like they would be too long and unwieldy. The last curve is the most complicated, the top of the legs. I used a compass to get a radius that matched the thickness of the material, then cut most of the waste off at the bandsaw. I actually thought the next couple of steps were going to take me a really long time, but Sapele planes so nicely. Getting these to shape only took about 2 minutes, and then it just took another couple of minutes of sanding. Really, Sapele is such a great wood to work with. I am totally going to use it more. Each of those curves only took about 5 minutes each to perfect, and then I could cut the taper on all the legs. I used an L-fence for the first time in my last video, and I really liked it, so I decided to try it again here. I used a scrap at the bottom of each leg to line up the bottom part of the template and put the top part at a line that was the same thickness as the top slats. This template is stuck on with double-sided tape, and it rides along the L-fence, creating the perfect taper. Another option would be a tapering jig, or to rough cut at the bandsaw and then clean up with a flush trim bit at the router. I'm really liking this L-fence though, and I think I'm going to be using it a lot more. I guess thinking about this more now while I'm editing, I could have put stops on the underside of the MDF template to make lining up the workpiece even easier and more accurate. Maybe if it wasn't 10 o'clock at night, I would have thought about that. I really don't want to be sanding at 10:30, but here we are. To prep for the leg assembly glue up, I just needed to sand the parts that I won't be able to reach after it's permanently together. Then I can glue it up. As per usual, I use way too much glue, but everything goes together really well, and I clean up all that excess glue with a toothbrush before moving on to the second leg assembly, which doesn't go as smoothly. Don't know how I missed it in my dry run, but one of the dominoes didn't seat down all the way, so after I applied the glue, I had to take it out and quickly trim another domino with the bandsaw, then it went smoothly after that. All right, it's 11:15 and I'm almost done. Like I'm really almost there. All I need to do is like put a round over, sand and finish and then install it. But I can't do that because I just glued this up and it's 11:15 and I don't want to be using a router right now because I'm so tired. But like, look how much I got done today. Actually, I could cross off one more. Gluing up the legs. So I feel like I didn't complete the table in a day, but like I built a table in a day. I'm gonna finish it tomorrow. I knew going into this that I wasn't gonna be able to actually finish it in one day. Like I wasn't gonna be able to put finish on and install it in one day. So I think that this is amazing what I did today. I am exhausted and I gotta go to sleep. See you tomorrow. All right, day 2 of my one-day build. So I came to the shop this morning and I was expecting a crazy mess because I was working for over 15 hours straight yesterday without taking any breaks. And it's actually not so bad. So I'm just gonna tidy up a little bit. And the first thing that I need to do though is address that blinking light before I can move on to the next steps. That blinking light was driving me nuts all day, but I didn't want to waste any precious time. Emptying it only takes 10 to 15 minutes, but I guess I was scared of the if you give a mouse a cookie situation that usually happens when I start futzing around my shop. All right, dustbin dealt with so I can get back to my list. I add an 1/8" round over to all the parts, something that I wanted to do before I glued up the leg assembly because now I couldn't reach the ends of those short aprons, but I just didn't think it was wise to use my router so late at night the previous day, and I was able to just reach into those corners with sandpaper, so no issues there. Something I completely forgot to put on my list, sanding. That probably explains why I thought I could finish this table in a day. I somehow completely blocked out one of the longest and most annoying parts of every build. Maybe that's why I continue building, some sort of woodworker's amnesia. Anyway, 3 hours later, sanding is finally done, and I look forward to forgetting this entire experience by the time I start the next one. To attach the top slats to the aprons, I'll be using Z-clips. They are little clips that are shaped like a Z that holds tabletops in place while still allowing for expansion and contraction of the wood throughout the seasons. This is especially important for outdoor furniture. I usually make one long slot at the table saw to do this, but thought it would be fun to test out the domino. I got lucky and nailed the domino setting on my first test cut, and now it's time to add some finish. There's a lot of debate about what finish to use for outdoor furniture. The only one I've used before is Spar Varnish, and I hated it. Well, I liked it for about 2 years until the sun finally won. After that, refinishing it was a nightmare because you have to sand off every last bit of the old finish before you can reapply. And I guess you guys now know how I feel about sanding. So this time I looked into penetrating oils instead. These soak deep into the wood, as you can see here, and you just keep applying more until the wood stops absorbing it. That's totally different from Spar Varnish, which just sits on the surface as a film. Penetrating oils do need to be reapplied every few years, but the nice thing is you can just wipe on a new coat without sanding. At least that's the hope. That's what my research told me anyway. I guess I'll have to get back to you in a couple years to let you know if it actually holds up. I'm hesitant to name the product because honestly, I don't know if it's any good. What I can say is the application process was long. This wood was very thirsty. It kept soaking up the finish, especially in the end grain. I used up the whole can and I probably should have used some more in a few spots. So I ordered another one and it was not cheap. I chose this product because it's meant for boats. I figured if it's good enough for a boat in the water, it's good enough for a table in my suburban backyard. I'm actually very curious to hear from you guys about your experiences with outdoor wood finishes. What are products that you guys have used in the past that you like or don't like? Let me know. This finish takes 3 days to fully cure, so 3 days later I can finally assemble my one-day build. The aprons click together with ease, and I lock them together with screws just for extra security through countersunk holes I drilled off camera. Now I can put the slats on, and this will be easier to do with the whole base upside down. The most important slats are the ones that are in line with the legs. So once those are perfectly in position, I lock it to the apron using Z-clips in the slots I cut out with the domino. Then I place all the slats on the ground using those 1/4-inch spacers between them and lock them all into place. Z-clips usually come with screws, but I don't use those. They're usually garbage and they always break on me. So I like to use truss head screws that I buy separately for stuff like this. These screws have a wider washer-like head, which I feel have a better holding power than regular screws. And if you buy good ones, they won't break. While the table is upside down, I put a little epoxy on the end grain of the table legs just to seal them a bit better from water exposure on the floor, and also added these rubber feet bumpers for even more protection. Now I need some help from my muscle to turn the table over because it is heavy and it's done. I set out to build a table in one day, and I think I actually did that. I worked for 15 hours the first day and 5 or 6 hours the second day, so it took me less than 24 hours total a day to build this. And honestly, I can't even believe that. If I weren't doing this as a 24-hour challenge, I probably would have broken it into 3 manageable days. Milling on day 1, joinery and design details on day 2, then sanding and finishing on day 3. But pushing through and getting it done in one day was actually a really fun challenge. And now every time we sit around this table, I get to say, yeah, I built this table in a day using wood that was gonna go in the trash. And honestly, that makes all the sanding totally worth it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Oh, I almost just drank this. That's why I label it. I'm so tired. Okay.